Our Senseless Toil, 1933. Viktor Schauberger often commented on his ideal picture of free people, which he took from the more evolved wild animals, who, in a free and undisturbed nature, know no hunger or dependency. No stag greases another's palm, that is, there is no dependency and no exploitation. Alois Kokali, Implosion Magazine, No. 47, p. 14. The achievements of the 20th century. We have today become accustomed to the fact that millions of people can no longer earn their daily bread by honest labor. They must obtain the necessities of life by scavenging from refuse heaps like animals, by begging, robbery, fraud, or even murder. Having lost faith in current methods and customs, and viewing education as an exercise in futility, our children are banding together, arming themselves and preparing to secure their rightful place in society by force. Under conditions where hospitals and refuges for the homeless are overcrowded, where the clientele of drug addiction clinics and lunatic asylums is increasing, and where cases of suicide are growing, it is understandable that no sane-minded person any longer gives credence to the empty promises of our leaders. It has long been apparent to thinking people that, if no radical departure in current economic doctrines and practices occurs, then only an enforced decimation of the overlarge population, a well-organized mass murder, or, expressed more aesthetically, a modern war, might perhaps cut this Gordian knot. Our Senseless Toil is the longest of Viktor Schauberger's published writings. It is not reproduced here in full, however, as some portions have been relocated according to theme in other volumes. Those relating more specifically to water in The Water Wizard, and those to forestry in The Fertile Earth, respectively volumes 1 and 3 of the Eco-Technology series. Some short items from elsewhere whose sources are indicated have been included in this introductory section, which finishes with the conclusion of Our Senseless Toil, our intellectual leaders, who have brought such wretchedness upon us. Despite its supposedly high technological culture, the civilized world has reached such an ethical nadir that it has become incapable of perceiving that this physical and moral decline is none other than a progressive cultural dissolution. Humanity's most sacred possession, its freedom of subjective thought, action, and feeling, will be literally trodden underfoot by people who were never really in a position to intervene in a positive way. In such a situation, the colors under which these leaders choose to march is quite immaterial, because the same oppressive drive exists everywhere. Generally, the inner perception of the true causes has been lost, and consequently, the last chance of really effective help. Moreover, those in positions of power, who are incapable of forming their own opinion, must constantly rely on the advice of so-called experts, who are themselves victims of a universally inferior education. As a result, they are unable to realize that it is precisely their advice, and the actions arising from it, which will inevitably transform this earth into a hell when it could be a paradise. If humanity does not soon come to its senses and realize that it has been misled and misinformed by its intellectual leaders, the prevailing laws of nature, with poetic justice, will reliably act to bring about a fitting end to this ineptly contrived culture. Unfortunately, the most frightful catastrophes or scandalous disclosures will have to happen before people realize that it is their own mistakes that have led to their undoing. These can only be rectified with great difficulty precisely because they were principally committed by the authorities. Rather than pass judgment upon themselves, these institutions and individuals, who are ever protective of their own interests, would allow millions of their fellow human beings to perish before they would ever admit to their mistakes. In discovering the causes, however, only one small step has been taken, because a host of so-called experts is arrayed against any systematic attempt to put these errors right. These experts are obliged to advocate the course they have championed, because it is their livelihood and they wish to be looked after until the end of their days. Yet, even this obstacle might be overcome, if the mistakes could at least be restricted to a particular branch of industry. A thorough investigation into the most common mistakes made over the centuries reveals the enormous spread of the malaise arising from fallacious precepts and perverse practices. It reveals such grave cultural, technological, and economic transgressions that no branch of industry is left untouched. Not even a partially unaware expert can absolve himself of his complicity, whatever his chosen field. At the outset, a powerful opposition must be reckoned with. It will be quite futile to expect any support from experts when, under these circumstances, it becomes evident that nearly every one of them would be threatened. But this obstacle should cause no alarm, for we are not concerned here with the livelihood of a few, but with the existence or non-existence of the whole of hoodwinked humanity. The behavior of our young people today certainly provides clear evidence that humanity is still morally healthy. They militate vehemently against the signs of decay emerging everywhere and refuse to continue to trot mindlessly down the road to war that has led us into an economic and cultural cul-de-sac. Opposition alone, however, achieves nothing. Our youth will only achieve any practical success in their struggle when the causes are identified and the errors are revealed that we and previous generations made, so plunging the world into misfortune. For this reason, it will become a sacred duty for all those who perceive the full extent of what has happened, to put aside all personal advantage and enlist for the final putting to rights of these many errors. The same is also the duty of everyone whose inner feelings admit the mere possibility of wrongdoing. The most effective way of righting these wrongs is to inform the general public of the great dangers of defective reasoning and the futility of pursuing the present goals. Rich and poor, high and low alike, must become seized by doubt and well-founded mistrust. Affecting ever-widening circles, this will ultimately kindle an inner sense of self-preservation in the broad mass of people. Once awakened, this inner sense must not be allowed to rest until the people, and therefore God, have made their verdict known. They will then begin to work at a grassroots level and bring about the necessary change for the better. It may indeed be a thankless task to inform the broad mass of people of the coming dangers which it neither sees nor wishes to see. However, regardless of the possible futility of revealing the fearful Menetical, doomsday vision or portent of doom, hovering above them, the attempt should still be made. At least our children and those dying helplessly in hospital should be made aware that they are the victims of history and the present culture arising from it. Therefore, the purpose of the following discourse is to arouse this inner sense of self-preservation in the public. If an instinctive premonition of the enormous dangers ahead, coupled with the mistrust latent in every human being, can be successfully awakened, then neither the problems affecting the establishment's prestige nor its fears for its future will significantly impede humanity's final rescue from self-destruction. It is not the purpose of these general explanations to elaborate on the many indicators brought to light in a review spanning 1,000 years. These are referred to briefly only where they have a profound significance, and their correct understanding is necessary for comprehension of the whole. Naturally, with such understanding, much will also have to be discarded. Once humanity perceives the wonderful conformity in natural law and the uniformity prevailing throughout nature, it will gain ethically and renounce any over-reliance on outward appearances. If we want to influence the course of our own existence positively, an existence now constantly imperiled by the re-emergence of alien life forms, and if we wish to safeguard it against further degeneration, we must allow nature to take command. Or, if we do wish to intervene, we must first become conversant with the simplest principles of life. Every living thing is ultimately a bridge towards the buildup of the whole. Similarly, the various religions and worldviews merely represent spiritual bridges, often in primitive form, and so must make way for better ones, once the ethical upswing of humanity has overtaken them. Indisputably, the mightiest bridge of all for the evolution of life is represented by the entity water. Science views the blood-building and character-influencing organism, water, as a chemical compound, and supplies millions of people with a liquid prepared from this, standpoints which is everything but healthy water. All efforts to make science acknowledge the serious errors it has made are useless from the start, because for it to make such an admission would surely be to condemn itself. Of necessity, therefore, it must adhere to its present doctrines. All those still possessed of healthy common sense should categorically refuse to continue to drink water prepared in this way. By continuing to consume such water, they will inevitably degenerate into cancer-prone, mentally and physically decrepit, physically and morally inferior individuals. Let the experts and scientists, who are heavily attacked in what follows here, examine everything objectively and refute, if they will, the many criticisms presented. Organism. In Viktor Schauberger's writings in German, the prefix is often separated from the rest of the word by a hyphen, for example Ursache, in lieu of Ursache, when normally it would be joined. By this he intends to place a particular emphasis on the prefix, thus endowing it with a more profound meaning than the merely superficial. This prefix belongs not only to the German language, but in former times also to the English, a usage which has now lapsed. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, denotes primitive, original, earliest, giving such examples as Shakespeare or origin. This begins to get to the root of Victor's use of it and the deeper significance he placed upon it. If one expands upon the interpretation given in the Oxford English Dictionary, then the concepts of primordial, primeval, primal, fundamental, elementary, of first principle come to mind, which further encompass such meanings as pertaining to the first age of the world or of anything ancient, pertaining to or existing from the earliest beginnings, constituting the earliest beginning or starting point, from which something else is derived, developed, or depends, applying to parts or structures in their earliest or rudimentary stage, the first or earliest formed in the course of growth. To this can be added the concept of an condition or state of extremely high potential or potency, a latent evolutionary ripeness, which given the correct impulse can unloose all of nature's innate creative forces. In the English text, therefore, the prefix will also be used wherever it occurs in the original German, and the reader is asked to bear the above in mind when reading what follows. Those best placed to judge whether these assertions are well-intentioned or not are the farmers, already struggling so hard for their native soil. Let all those who are forced to work in the great cities seriously contemplate what would happen if, in addition to their bread becoming increasingly scarce, expensive, and of worsening quality, their water also disappeared. This danger will be all the more dreadful because the remaining reserves of water will become an unquenchable source of that most frightful disease, cancer. Cancer is constantly on the increase, and if too far advanced, has no really effective cure. Therefore, let all those not fortunate enough to enjoy a cooling drink directly from a healthy spring consider where their water comes from, how it is distributed, and what artificial additives are used to make it drinkable. Those unfortunates who are forced year in and year out to drink sterilized water should earnestly consider how an organism will be affected by water whose naturally ordained ability to create life has been forcibly removed by chemical compounds. Sterilized and physically destroyed water not only brings about physical decay, but also gives rise to mental deterioration, and hence to the systematic degeneration of humanity and other life forms. The same is equally applicable to all forms of vegetation and all other preconditions for life in nature. The reason people mistake their cultural and economic decline for a passing crisis, and strive in vain to master the increasingly widespread misery, lies mainly in the intellectual deterioration of humanity. Conforming to natural law, this deterioration is followed or preceded by physical degeneration. Only a penetrating study by intuitively gifted people can fathom the innermost nature of the life-giving substance, water. Only through a painstaking investigation of the materialized substance, water, will it become possible to show a mentally and physically degenerating humanity the ways which will once more lead us upwards. Progress through transformation of the atom, not its destruction. By means of only slight variations in temperature, I have succeeded in decomposing various substances, elements and their compounds, minerals, metals, etc., into their constituent parts, and subsequently to rearrange and recombine them. At present, the scope for practical application of this discovery cannot be assessed, but it would undoubtedly imply a total reorientation in all areas of science and technology. Using this newly discovered conformity with natural law, I have already constructed fairly large installations in the fields of log rafting and river regulation. They have functioned faultlessly for a decade, and today still present insoluble enigmas to the various scientific disciplines concerned. Present management systems of forestry, agriculture, water, and energy resources, as well as many theories and tenets of physics, chemistry, botany, and geology, will have to undergo a radical departure from basic principles. Even medical science will not be left unscathed by this discovery. In this way, it is possible to generate any amount of energy in and from water itself, and to regulate water courses over any given distance without embankment works. It is possible to transport timber and other materials down the central axis of flow, even if these materials, ore, stones, etc., are heavier than water. It is possible to raise the height of the water table over a whole region, and to endow the groundwater with the full spectrum of elements required for the prevailing vegetation. Furthermore, timber and other materials can be rendered incombustible and rot-resistant. Drinking water and spa water of any desired composition and therapeutic effect can be artificially produced for man, beast, and soil, in the same way that this occurs naturally. Water can be raised vertically in pipes without pumps. Electricity and radiant energies of any magnitude can be generated almost without cost. Soil quality can be improved and cancer, tuberculosis, and nervous disorders healed. The disrupted cycle, the cause of the crisis. Today, a yearning for living naturally is on the increase. This craving for a strong, peaceful, and healthy nature is an inevitable symptom of the present age and the counterbalance to the inorganic civilization we erroneously describe as culture. This civilization is the creation of humanity, who high-handedly and without consideration for the true workings of nature has created a world devoid of meaning and foundation. Now nature threatens to destroy humanity, for through his behavior and his activities he, who should be her master, has disturbed nature's inherent unity. Today we are standing helpless and perplexed before all that we have created, increasingly forced to recognize that our work, with all its problems, merely serves our own self-destruction. With no glimmer of improvement anywhere in sight, we feel hopelessly propelled towards a forlorn future. It is quite understandable, therefore, that an increasing number of people are sick and tired of this insane activity and now seeking ways to return to Mother Nature. The human is a being created according to nature's laws and is therefore dependent upon them. In the course of time, our magnum opus, our self-created pseudo-culture, here the philosophical concept of culture is not intended, but rather the forces of civilization, always based on culture, as manifested in society and commerce. The closest approximation to the concept of culture applied here is when it is compared to nature as an entity and a driving force. VS has become a meaningless and incoherent monstrosity. Through the immense power of technology, it has reached such gargantuan proportions that it almost equals the power of nature herself. At the very least, it is already able to interfere destructively with her great life-giving functions. Humanity represents but a small spark, a mere microorganism in nature's great panoply of life. Encouraged by a short-lived, illusory success, humanity has embarked on a course that is beginning to disrupt the great coherence of life. Not only this, but it is also about to put an end to all high-quality growth and production on our macroorganism, Earth. Despite our accumulation of material wealth, humanity is now engulfed by a widespread economic collapse. Many areas of production exhibit regressive trends, so that visible epicenters of decay are increasing on all sides and threatening humanity itself. Despite all the research, no means can be found to prevent humanity from decaying alive. This is no more than the just and legitimate consequence of human activity. Knowing nothing of nature's omnipotent laws, and with mindless greed, humanity claws into the life-giving organism of Mother Earth. She is now, with elemental power, beginning to paralyze the wanton hand that dared disturb the forces that serve all creation. This unique law, which reigns supreme throughout nature's vastness and oneness, expresses itself in every creature and organism. It is the law of ceaseless cycles that in every organism is linked to a definite time span and a particular tempo. If some intervening force should either accelerate, retard, or altogether arrest the tempo of this cycle, in which every event is governed by the action of the preceding one, then it can no longer serve the legitimate purpose for which, in common with all of nature's creations, it is destined. The affected organism lags behind, thrust aside from the main evolutionary stream of life. All those organisms whose life or death are dependent on it are also condemned to death, ultimately causing the demise of the foolish, interfering hand which is to blame for it all. The causative force is our mind. Moving as it does in the realm of the phenomenal, the mind is unable to perceive the nature of the thing as such, and therefore, as Kant says, remains limited in its categorizing ability. And the soulless technology it has spawned, including our lawless and mind-destroying technological culture. These are jointly responsible for disrupting the circulation of the Earth's water and blood. Moreover, if everything this mechanistic civilization has created should perish in step with such development, then the breakdown is in no way a passing crisis. It is the inevitable collapse of a dizzily high, foundationless cultural edifice, whereby whatever is left of genuine culture will also be swept away. Nature protects herself. Nature's most effective protection is the frailty of humanity, its work, and its activities. The consequences of its activities must sooner or later bring about its own demise because the greater part of its present endeavors contravenes every principle of nature. Hence, it is merely a question of the efficacy of humanity's activities and of the attainment of a particular level of culture which determines when the reaction sets in, when all that has been built up with so much care and sweat must once more collapse upon itself. Once humanity has reached this point, nature will rid herself effortlessly of her greatest enemy, and with renewed energy will rebuild all that humanity has destroyed. If, as a result, more and more people are to be found today who fear this fearful mayhem, they do it less out of a love of nature than for their own self-preservation, which still remains a natural force in people. There are a few individuals possessed of great foresight who are still in touch with nature and are able to perceive the insanity of our work in its true light. Their ceaseless efforts are a solemn, though sadly unheeded admonition to their contemporaries. The latter are preoccupied with the exigencies of day-to-day existence and incapacitated by over-specialization. They are no longer able to perceive the minute and fragile processes through which all life in nature is organically created and maintained, pulse beat by pulse beat. Unfortunately, the warnings to come to our senses are in the end but cries in the wilderness. The Laws of Nature from Tao, No. 153, January L. 937. Everything is governed by one law. A human being is a microcosmos, that is, the laws prevailing in the cosmos also operate in the minutest space of the human being. V.S. From Implosion Magazine, No. 18, p. 6. Although governed by immutable laws, nature is also subjected to eternal transformation. Within this constant metamorphosis lies hidden the profound secret of all evolution. Man alone clings to rigid and seemingly incontrovertible formulae and dogmas, and these are bringing about his undoing. Our origin and our future are shrouded in an almost impenetrable secret that we are unable to unveil. That we cannot do so is because we do not believe in the eternal transmutation and reincarnation of all living things. We do not perceive that all development must cease if we fail to respect the inner stillness and seclusion of Mother Earth, and continue to exploit the sunken residues of former life, coal, oil, etc., for purposes other than those wise nature ordained. Nothing in nature ever happens directly. One extreme always triggers of the other. Nature's Rhythmical Processes from Implosion Magazine, numbered 18. Nature is not served by rigid laws, but by rhythmical, reciprocal processes. Nature uses none of the preconditions of the chemist or the physicist for the purposes of evolution. Nature excludes all fire for purposes of growth on principle. Therefore, all contemporary machines are unnatural and constructed according to false premises. Nature avails herself of the biodynamic form of motion, which provides the biological prerequisite for the emergence of life. Its purpose is to procreate higher conditions of matter out of the originally inferior raw materials. This gives the evolutionally older, or the numerically greater rising generation, the possibility of a constant capacity to evolve. Without any growing and increasing reserves of energy, there would be no evolution or development. This results first and foremost in the collapse of the so-called law of the conservation of energy, and consequently the law of gravity and all other dogma lose any rational or practical basis. The solid, liquid, gaseous, etheric, and energetic content of the organism, water, are not impurities as contemporary science would have us believe, but should be considered as aspiring, latent, energetic substances. With present methods of regulation, these are expelled. They can only be retained in the water if it moves sinuously along very particular systems of curves. The so-called carrying capacity and tractive force 11 of water are not derived from any mechanical thrust. They are the biological consequence of self-evolving life forms, which are built up through a hitherto unknown form of tension or potential. As an energetic nucleus, it is the product of the organic syntheses that occur after the atoms of the basic elements have been dissociated. The most interesting aspect in this regard is that the inner carrying and tractive forces in naturally flowing water can be separated, enabling their use as a natural formative force or as a natural motive force. The biological outcome of the exploitable inner force of this organism, water on the one hand, is almost unlimited abundance of food, and on the other, if the formative component of this natural force is switched off, absolute freedom of motion can be achieved. In short, the result is free and unlimited mechanical power. Contemporary agricultural and economic practices are the cause of the decline in the quality of soil produce. From a more naturalesque standpoint, this concerns the suppression of all biological and indirect intermediate processes. In order to prevent this, it is necessary to ensure that agricultural equipment for biological farming is suited to nature's purposes. If we wish to continue to exist, we shall have to become accustomed to substantially different ways of working or adapt ourselves to natural forms of motion, whose patterns we can find in nature. Then everything that we can see around us or are otherwise aware of will be provided in superfluity. What I have stated above is absolutely no product of wild fantasy, but is a fact that can be proven in every case. No scientist can deny this, because the devices have already been built that produce these organic products of synthesis. With the aid of these higher creative forces produced by biochemical motion, the fundamental law of mechanics, that resistance to motion increases with greater velocity, is rendered null and void. The resistance decreases with the naturalesque movement of the apparently lifeless contents of those organisms, air and water. Footnote 11, tractive force. This refers to the force described hydraulically as shear force, the force that dredges and dislodges sediment. In German, the term for shear force is Schubkraft, whereas Viktor Schauberger uses the word Schleppkraft. The verb schleppen means to drag, draw, or pull. Viktor Schauberger's choice of Schleppkraft here is quite specific, since in his view the movement of sediment is due to the sucking action of fast-flowing, dense cold water downstream, rather than to the mechanical impact of the water coming from upstream. In view of this subtle change in emphasis, in lieu if the hydraulically correct term shear force, the term tractive force will be used. This dynamic is similar to the effect of wind on roofs, where a roof is blown off not by force from the windward side, but rather by the sucking effect of vortices created on the leeward side. Footnote 12. Naturalesque. As adjective or adverb in the Oxford English Dictionary, this is defined as having the characteristics of nature or natural objects, and imitation or adherence to nature. Its use here and elsewhere is to differentiate between processes and objects that occur naturally and similar objects and processes that are technically contrived so as to accord with nature's own functions. Estranged from nature, humanity does not understand water from which all life emerges. It believes that by abrogating water's rights and forcing it to flow according to its laws, it can build up the energies that evolve from the deceased remains of former life. These energies are necessary to allow the vastly increased, evolutionally older to come into existence, so that after their own death they too can serve the following generations as a source of spiritual influx or inspiration. Nature operates only indirectly. How else should it be done then, is always the immediate question. The answer is simple. Exactly in the opposite way that it is done today. Very simple observations reveal that nature's ways are always indirect. It is through our sheer intransigence that we always find it necessary to adopt the most direct approach. Therefore, we should not complain if as a result we are constantly at odds with almighty nature. All we really need to do is adapt ourselves intelligently to nature's marvelous order, to understand that it is indeed both foolish and futile to light against her forces, and to realize that if left to itself, all would otherwise happen of its own accord. Moreover, the recovery we so fervently desire would then come about quite automatically. Nature constantly indicates the right paths to take. Most certainly these new ways will lead in the opposite direction to the one we are wont to take. This is only to be expected, because it is the present direction that has led to our undoing. All those who seriously wish to travel this new road should take note of the following explanations. Questions for science. My dear friends, we move everything back to front. What we are doing is incorrect and contrary to nature. Nature moves in other ways. She primarily employs attracting or sucking energies, since these are indispensable to nature for the growth and maintenance of life. Nature only uses pressural energies and explosive forces for destruction and reducing quality. The work of atomic physicists is also upside down. They would be more accurate if they started with simple nuclear fusion. They should set about the cold transformation of hydrogen into helium, as nature has done over the millions of years of creation. Today's technology has grasped the tiger by the tail, because it splits the heaviest atoms with the greatest development of heat and an enormous expenditure of energy. V.S. Implosion Magazine, number 51, p. 22. Since the very beginning of time, the sun has stood above everything, staring down in icy silence at the frenzied activities of humanity, who regard it as a fiery orb. How could it be otherwise? Such is their direct mental approach towards life. Yet the closer we approach this source of light and heat, the colder and darker its face will become. The nearer we are to it, the brighter the stars will be. As its light diminishes, heat, atmosphere, water, and life will also disappear. What serves the sun as a carrier of light and heat, if, in the view of our learned scientists, space is a vacuum? Why is the light and heat in the tropics more diffuse, and at the poles the sun's light more intense and its radiant heat less? Why is water at the poles warmer at the bottom? Why is the sunlit surface so icily cold? Why doesn't the warmer, lighter bottom water of the sea rise upwards? Why are water temperatures at the equator so warm? Why is it that it gets colder with increasing depth? And why does it get warmer again below the boundary layer of +4° C, +39 2° F? And why does life begin there anew? Why do the magnetic lines of force run from south to north? And why does the earth rotate from west to east? Why does a top stand upright when it is spun from the side? Why is the desert so dead despite all the heat? How is it that the warm Gulf Stream can push cold seawater aside and wend its way for thousands of kilometers over ocean mountains and valleys in a reversed temperature gradient, without the assistance of a mechanical gradient? Why does groundwater in walls rise far above the surface of the ground? Why don't wooden posts rot underwater but always above it? Why do damp-tiled roofs dry out from the eaves towards the ridge? Why can rising cold water pierce through the hardest rock? Why doesn't the earth's warm air rise? Why is it so cold at the top of a mountain, nearer the sun? Why is it warmer nearer the ceiling and colder at the floor in our houses when an artificial source of heat is used? Why do gases condense with a decrease in temperature, and why don't the fiery gases of the sun, with supposed temperatures of over 6,000 degrees C, 10,832 degrees Fahrenheit, stream out into space? Why does marble expand with heat, and why doesn't it contract again with cold? Why do west to east flowing watercourses fertilize their banks? Why are the banks of east and west flowing rivers so barren? Why are the banks of south and north flowing watercourses fertile on one side only? Why do rivers flowing into cold seas migrate laterally to the north? Why does the salt content of the seas vary? Why do herrings migrate northwards in winter? Why do deep-sea fish glow? Why do cold-blooded animals carry fever-inducing poison? Why does a cold fever occur in the tropics? Why does a warm fever arise from a chill? What is fever anyway? What is temperature? What is heat? What is cold? What is energy? Why does the heart beat in our breast? Who gives this muscle its impulse to move? Where is the motor for this pump? Why does blood circulate in our blood vessels? Why do we breathe day and night when asleep and even when totally unconscious? Why do the fluids in a chicken's egg circulate without a heart? Why does a stone suffocate when we cut off its air supply? Why do light-demanding timbers have a thick bark, and shade-demanders only a thin one? Why does a trout stand still in a raging torrent, as if by magic? What is it that keeps the earth floating in space? Does the heart beat because we breathe, or do we breathe because the heart beats? Where is the heart of a plant? Why does water pulsate and breathe? Why does groundwater manage to remain on the sides of mountains, and why, growing colder and heavier, does it rise upwards? Why does it frequently spring from high peaks? Why do deltas and estuaries develop? What is evaporation? What is vaporization? What is dissolution? What is combination? What is absorption? And on what effects are these processes founded? Why is our body temperature subnormal when climbing a mountain and above normal as we descend? The error of civilization. Is there really such an enormous difference between the breaching of a riverbank and the bursting of our blood vessels? Is it really necessary that the last human being must rot away alive before we all become consciously aware of the errors of our ways? Why can we not admit to ourselves that it is our senseless activity that is killing us? Do we actually have the right to stuff such worthless knowledge into our children? When science has already led us to the very brink of disaster, where does our knowledge begin and where does it end? Does anyone still dare to speak of science and culture in the same breath? Are our children actually wrong if they refuse to be instructed by their parents and teachers and choose to go their own way? Is one seriously to believe that hunger can be appeased by political phrases and bayonets? Are there really still people who believe that improvements can be achieved through coercion, when work undertaken of their own free will has already brought such unspeakable misfortune? If this be true, then let nature quietly continue to so prevail, for she will then do great and noble work. Nature is simpler in her effects and more complex in her functions than our rational minds can conceive. The road to free energy. More energy is encapsulated in every drop of good spring water than an average-sized power station is presently able to produce. These energies can be generated effortlessly and almost free of cost if we follow the path which nature constantly shows us and abandon the blind alleys of conventional technology. Happiness and health are available to us just as near cost-free as unlimited energy, if we but once realize that in water dwell will and its resistance, life. We struggle so hard for these today because in all our endeavors we constantly rob the bearer of all life, water, of its noblest possession, its soul. The will of nature serves all things and expresses itself in growth by way of atomic dissociation and transformation. It is only through our obsession with atom-destroying work and our selfish over-exploitation of her resources that we encounter nature's resistance. The only possible outcome of the purely categorizing compartmentality thrust upon us at school is the loss of our creativity. People are losing their individuality, their ability to see things as they really are, and thus their connection with nature. We are fast approaching a state of equilibrium impossible in nature. This equilibrium must force us into total economic collapse, for no stable system of equilibrium exists. The principles upon which our actions are founded are therefore invalid because they operate within parameters that do not exist. Our work is the embodiment of our will. The spiritual manifestation of this work is its effect. When such work is properly done, it brings happiness, and when carried out incorrectly, it assuredly brings misery. Humanity, your will is paramount. You can command nature if you but obey her. Do not complain if you must become her slave.